just had a conversation about the War Powers Act, United States divestment in South Africa, and the whole time I'm staring at him, I'm like, it's the freaking president! So I was losing it, but it made me more and more gradually interested in politics. So this is like a very sentimental thing. Of course, that was when he was receiving the award, and I was so happy because I got to be the one of all the students who sat with him and had a conversation in my school newspaper. Next one. I ended up becoming let's overthrow the government and change the world to a better place guy. When I was at Boston University, I joined a student organization called Umoja, and we did a lot of political rallies to speak out against hate mongers such as David Duke, who many of you may know about now because he's gotten back into the thing. So this was me when I was about 18. There's some examples of me and my work at Boston University. At that point, I also continued with just writing letters to the editors and newspapers. I started to gradually have an interest in politics and wanted to be a part of the political process. So, but I also tried to learn how to study human anatomy, continue art, drawing, things like that. Next one. It's ironic that Susan Musinski is here for the slide presentation, because when I was about 15, I got sent to a camp called Anytown. And Anytown was a week-long camp that had kids from different backgrounds, different races, different religions, and they dealt with racism, sexism, homophobia, all layers of it, and you're stuck with each other for a week to really break down a lot of these barriers. It was an absolute life-changing experience. Susan here was one of the people who ran it. So I love that she's here now, because I'm like, she had no ideas for me in slides. But again, doing this made me have a lot more attempt to have love, compassion, and understanding for people that are different than me. So this is my name tag up here. This, without even thinking about it, with this thing here, that's almost like a precursor to the scroll project I'll get to later on. But it was very, very powerful and a very moving experience. And to be honest with you, considering the state of the world today, I wish to God they had more of these programs out, because it's no longer really in Massachusetts. One of my main big projects, and I did this to embarrass my son, that's why he's not in here. Eternal Presence. Part of my presentation is about timelines. One of my favorite timelines is John Wilson is one of my favorite artists. He passed a couple of years ago, and he sculpted this giant sculpture called Eternal Presence. It's neither male or female, and it sits in front of the Museum of African American Art in Roxbury. Every day on my son's birthday since he was first born, I take a photo of him in front. And I told him I'm going to do it until you're 22, and then eventually I'll have an exhibit of it. So he's 17 now, his birthday is Monday. Right after school, we get there. And like when he was younger, it was adorable because he was trying to feel it and understand it, but as he got older, he starts making cool poses in front of it, all that kind of stuff. But it's one of the most consistent things I've done over the last 16, 17 years, because I am very intrigued with the concept of the timeline, or evolution, how something changes. Next one. This was my discussion about the Scroll Project when I was in graduate school. I'll get into that a little bit further, but this is a portrait of Shea connecting to me, or that later on connects between us, dealing with this thing that I've started working on around 2003. So I'll segue into that now. This is a portrait of Jack Johnson, pen and ink, pencils. These are just examples of the different medium that I use. Now, the Scroll Project, for those who don't know, I started in 2003 a timeline dealing with the war in Afghanistan and the war of what was happening under then President Bush. Every month, every week, every couple of months or what have you, when news or things happen, I start to write, document, and illustrate on these rolls of paper. Now, I started this when my son was almost 3 years old. Part of it was because there was some people who challenged me who, for some strange reason, wanted to know, was I pro-America or pro-Saddam? Now, the younger people probably don't remember how much the term, we're not going to call it French fries, we're going to call it freedom fries, because France won't jump in. All the older people know what I'm talking about. So I said, you know what, I'll take some notes on the war in Afghanistan, I'll get back to you when it's over. I had no idea it would be the longest war in American history, and that I would go from being in my early 30s all the way into my mid-40s, and that I might be in my 70s before anything is done. So I've had folks say, well, when are you going to get tired of it? When are you going to be done with it? When do you get this, and this? And my response has always been, I'll just get more paper. So all I gotta do is get more paper. And again, I'm interested in a timeline. So one of the first things with this illustration is Jack Johnson was the first African-American who was heavyweight boxing champ in American history. And when President Obama was elected, I started making comparisons as to how our society reacted to Jack Johnson to how our society is reacting to the first African-American president. And the trajectory is almost the same. He was the first boxing champ in the early 1900s, and yet some of the same hate has continued into this guy who was president just over these last few years. So you'll see here some of my sketches or some of my ideas on the scroll itself. I was disappointed that Ray Charles was dead, because I would have loved for him to have performed at the inauguration. No disrespect to Beyonce or anything like that, but I love Charles. So I did a number of sketches. You'll see some marks on there because I realized you can't drink and draw at the same time. Because it spilled right onto it, and I was like, oh man, Kool-Aid messed it up. I do research on veterans because in Afghanistan and Iraq, we've lost more limbs there than any other time in American history, from IED, improvisational explosive devices, from a number of other kinds of attacks and things like that. And this stuff not just only affects men, but it affects women. And when these people come home, a lot of times they can't have children because of the fear of dropping the children because they're missing limbs. A lot of times their bodies don't adjust to the prosthetics. So I live not that far from a place in Jamaica Plain that's a Veterans Administration that has let me come in there a few times just to draw and sketch some of the actual prosthetics and the technology that they're trying to develop further so that it's a natural transition. But right now it isn't. Sometimes with these kinds of things it's painful, it doesn't fit, or it has to constantly be adjusted. So a lot of times I address it. I sometimes panel it out because again, as I was saying before, I was influenced by comic books. So sometimes I panel out and I take notes about some of the things that are happening. And a lot of times it's my own editorial opinion about what's going on. Now, when it comes to fact checking, I go through every source. And I try as much as possible, internet, online, New York Times, this newspaper, all that. But I gotta tell you, Fox News, can't. And I try to give that kind of thing a benefit out, alternative source. But as Al Sharpton or someone would say, you're entitled to your own opinion, but not your own facts. So it makes me laugh. Listen to some of that. So a lot of times I'll do a lot of research about things, about the racism, some of the things that are going on in political discourse. This is a part of the scroll where I talk about war and lies, because the first casualty of war is truth. And a lot of what happens in Afghanistan and Iraq deals with minerals, resources, oil, poppy fields that caused the heroin epidemic to spread and things like that. So a lot of times I'm addressing it and I'll use large text in addition to smaller drawing sketches and things like that. I'll continue it when I talk about drone strikes and how they affect people. I was very intrigued by the Arab Spring, the young man who committed suicide that led to this uprising a few years ago because of how he was being treated and disrespected in Egypt and how it spread thanks to social media. So people say, I'm tired of this situation. So I started thinking about revolution and how revolution happens. But also air quality. Because I have been more interested in environmental issues, water, air, the things that when you say we're entitled to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, there are legal people out there saying, but that doesn't count when it comes to air, or when it comes to fresh water, and how dangerous that trajectory is we're going on. Flint is just the tip of the iceberg of something far more sinister going on. Don't want to scare kids, but this is the kind of thing I address. In 2010 and 11, I read and did some research. There's a guy named Matt Taibbi who writes for Rolling Stone magazine. I'm very intrigued by some of his editorials and some of the things that he writes about in terms of he's like a very good journalist. And he made me start thinking of looking and doing research into a situation that happened with some US soldiers that were on a kill team, where they were trying to bait Afghan children into situations for women and children, and they were just executing them and taking photos of it and posting it on social media. And for me, from 2010 to 2011, or during that period, I was like, my God, if this internet thing gets bigger and bigger, it's going to be like snuff films all the time, or a celebration of murder to the point where it's going to desensitize people. You could go on to the next When there was a revolution, or when there was a big uprising in Britain that the media tended to beat down, and these young, and again, it's young people who start these revolutions and young people who start this activism. I started looking into that more deeply, but also some of the ways that the United States treats the civilians in the countries that we are helping out or that we've invaded and that we're doing things with. So I started writing about it. Sometimes I'll use blue pencil. I kind of like that song by Rolling Stones, Street Fighting Man, so that kind of comes in there a little bit. Sometimes I'll reference that. And this was about the history of executions in the country, and my criticism of President Obama when he said, quit complaining, take off your bed slippers, and get out there and do stuff. And it's like, you know, it's easy to keep saying that, but people are loyally voting for you, and yet the historical, racial stuff that's happening in the political system of this country is ongoing. And he was very reluctant to address some of those things. And for me, it's like a massive chess game. And you don't know what move is going to be game over, or what move, where you go, which place you go. As a man of color, that's how I always feel. Go to the next one. Sometimes I'll write some things that freak me out and offend me, such as when he was confronted at the airport, and that Governor Jan Brewer put her hands in his face and started talking to him, and I was like, what must have been going through her mind when she addressed him that way? But I also thought about, and sometimes I'll go back and forth over the issue of abortion or something like that, and I'll say, I don't have a problem with it in a sense of that, but look at the situation in society and things that are done to people that causes someone to have to be in that situation. So it's easy to say, well, we're against it, we'll stop this, we'll do these things, but